93, 93, 93. This is Aman Asha Renew from asharenew.com. Today, I want to speak on why the planets are named after Roman deities. See, when it comes to the Roman language, as well as the Roman numerals, they were created to essentially be used by the masses, as we would say in today's terms. It was meant to be a commercial language. It was meant to be mainstream. Essentially, it was meant to be the language of the commoner, something that everybody could remember. Venus is just a lot easier to remember than Aphrodite, which would be the Greek name for Venus. Pluto is a lot easier to remember than Hades. So we see that even in the tarot, the Roman numerals used to be from 1 to 22 before the zero was added. So the zero was added later on because the tarot represented qualities that went beyond the mainstream, so they had to acknowledge the zero. But that came over time. That wasn't an immediate revelation. So for a while, it was on a commercial or mainstream level. So you don't deal with the Greek energy until you get into astronomy and astrophysics. Because once we start dealing with astronomy and we start dealing with fixed stars, we would realize that the brightest star in a particular constellation is the Alpha star. So, in the constellation of Aries, for example, the brightest star is Alpha Aries. Then the second brightest is Beta, so on and so forth. The Greek alphabet is utilized because now things get a little more advanced. Because now we're not just talking about wandering stars, which are planets. Now we're talking about a collection of stars, which is a constellation. A constellation is a collection of stars. So now we're not just dealing with one thing, we're dealing with multiple stars. And each of these stars have their own myth. And that's when we get into more the Greek mythology, once we start digging into the astronomy. This is why the astronomy is not necessarily mainstream. Most people that are into astrology are not necessarily into astronomy. That's more of an advanced concept. You learn that in due time, if that is your desire. But if we're just speaking about horoscopes and predictions, for example, we may not go into the science of the fixed stars. The science of the wandering stars is most of the time enough. So going back to the question, why are the Roman names used? It's simply because, as we see on a commercial level, on a mainstream level, it is very easy to convey. It's easier to remember Mercury than Hermes because it has been simplified. Like if you study the mythology of Mercury versus the mythology of Hermes, the stories are similar, but there are variations because it represents different periods of time, different ages. So changes occurred as the spirits evolve. The spirits' names change because the energy evolves. Sometimes the energy gets more advanced, sometimes it gets more simplified. As we know, Mercury would then become Odine. So you can say in every culture we have a Mercury energy, we have the messenger, but they all are their own currency in their own right. So although we can say Hermes is similar to Mercury, that's similar to Odine and all the other messenger gods, they all still represent their own unique individuality because they are processes or stages of alchemy. So if you look at it as stages of alchemy and you observe the evolution of Hermes into Mercury, of Aphrodite into Venus, instead of saying Chronos, you would say Saturn. Because you see, it has a mainstream appeal. It has a worldwide appeal versus the Greek or other languages. These are just more advanced things. It's not for the mainstream. And that's why it was separated. That's why astrology was separated from astronomy because one is for the mainstream, as one is for the actual philosopher. So once it was separated, it was easy to market astrology and horoscopes and all these things, especially to the West. And that's how the West was able to absorb astrology because it was simplified. And this is the main difference between Western astrology and Eastern astrology. Eastern astrology is way more technical, way more advanced. You can't really grasp it as quickly as you can the Western astrology. So to even comprehend Eastern astrology, you have to comprehend Western astrology. So when to go into the occult, for example, you have to go through the commercialism before you get to the advanced science and the advanced mathematics. You must start with the simplified science and the simplified math. So the Western astrology just represents the introduction into astrology, into more advanced topics. And for those who do not wish to go any further, you can still be satisfied with just a simple horoscope. And that's just the power of astrology. It can be essentially summarized into a paragraph or broken down into a whole manifestation, a whole archetype. It simply depends on the observer and the practitioner. And with that, I bear peace. 93, 93, 93.